Hello, Kári.
Hello, Richard.
Kári and I are standing on the edge of a beach. It's dawn here on the island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of northeast England, just south of the Scottish border.
There's the smell of seaweed in the air. It's cold. Across the causeway, I can see the lights of the mainland.
And if I try to imagine what it was like on a morning like this, a much warmer morning, on the 8th of June, 793...
Yeah, we chose to come here in winter.
We did. I think it's not hard now, looking around us in the dawn light, to imagine a band of Vikings wade ashore here onto this beach. A group of men coming in one or two boats with axes and swords and shields. We can imagine someone would have seen it and rung out the bell in alarm as people scrambled to hide themselves and hide the church's treasure as best they could. And through the eyes of a Viking coming ashore, you'd notice straight away how undefended this place is.
Being here now, I feel this sense of the dread that must have produced.
We've come to Lindisfarne for this introduction of this podcast series, Viking Lives. Over the course of these episodes, Kári and I will be bringing you the great arc of Viking history, told through a chain of life stories, beginning with the king of their gods, then moving into their half-legendary, half-real figures, and then Viking men and women who are revealed to us in the full light of history, from the sagas, from the medieval chronicles, and the archaeological record. There's not much information about what actually happened here on that day.
No, but we know there was an attack, and we know this was a rich place with hoards of silver and gold, and that the abbey must have been incredibly noticeable to everyone who passed through here.
At the time, the greatest treasure here was probably the Lindisfarne Gospels. It was this beautiful illuminated manuscript, and it was encased in a leather cover and studded with all these precious jewels. And on that morning in 793, the Vikings came ashore, they seized the gold and silver from the church, they tore off that jewelled cover, they cut down anyone who protested with their swords and axes, they threw some people into the sea to drown, and they abducted many more slaves. Today we know there had been earlier Viking coastal raids in Europe before the raid on Lindisfarne, but this was the one that sent shockwaves through the Christian world. And that's why for a long time the Viking Age was said to have begun right here on this beach in Lindisfarne.
It's written about as though there's this sudden change in the behaviour of the Scandinavians and the Norse world that was visiting here already. And it seems as though something switched. At some point, trade between the northern countries and England went from some kind of peaceful coexistence to taking, stealing, killing.
One of the indications we have of that is a letter written by a man called Alcuin of York, who was serving in the court of Charlemagne. But he was from this part of the world, and he was horrified when he heard the news about the attack. And his view was that this occurred as a punishment from God, because the Christian people had been taking on pagan habits. I'm just going to quote from the letter he wrote to the king of Northumbria, Ethelred. He wrote, "Consider the dress, look at the hairstyle, how you have all wished to imitate the pagans in their beards and hair. Does not the terror threaten of those whose hairstyle you wish to have?" What do you think that tells us about what was going on here, Kári?
It sounds as though the Scandinavian visitors had quite a good look and people wanted to copy that, and I suppose maybe there was some glamour to them.
So the local Christian folk were starting to adopt Viking fashions. I think this tells us that there was trade and contact between the Christians and the pagan Vikings here. And the shock was that they came one day not as traders, but as raiders.
And can you imagine the horror of that moment? And it's no wonder that this place is kind of a site of an injury.
You're a man who was born in Iceland. You have a doctorate in medieval Icelandic studies, which is something a great many of us have, of course, I know, but
it's very common these
very
days.
Common these days, which means you're a saga scholar. Why do we care, Kári? Why do you care about the Vikings?
I love their stories, the stories of the Viking Age. They were composed 1,000 years ago, and yet the people in them feel very close to me. And a lot of them were written by Icelanders, by my ancestors. I feel that there's something of me in that world, but there are parts of them that I can't understand and want to understand. I actually want to see things from their point of view. I don't just want to see the Vikings from the point of view of the people who saw them stride ashore here 1,300 years ago. I want to see the stories from inside, from their perspective as humans. And what about you then, Richard? I mean, why are you here right now?
I've written 4 books that largely dwell on medieval history. One of those is one I co-wrote with you, of course, Sagaland. But in my other 3 books, the Vikings have come barging in, much the same way they barged into continental Europe and into the Baltic and into Iceland, into Greenland, to America. There's something about their energy and their ferocity that makes them inherently fascinating, I think, like all ferocious creatures are. But I can't think of a group of medieval people who reveal so much of themselves to us as the Vikings. And that's largely through the sagas. There's a curious intimacy that feels like I'm walking directly behind them, overhearing their conversation. And it's an intimacy I've found with no other people of the medieval era. So you and I have just been talking about the sagas. Can you just explain what we mean by the term saga?
The word saga comes from segja, a verb, and that means to say. And so really a saga is just someone saying something.
A telling.
A telling, yeah. And the ones that touch me the most are the stories of everyday people. And that's all about social interactions and tension, and about loyalty and desire and jealousies. That's what drives the sagas. The saga is an act. It's a performance of something that's remembered and told and told and told over and over again until it becomes something that the community owns together, that travels the world. When the Norse settlers, when the Vikings arrived at a new place, they would throw a piece of timber from a high seat and follow that piece of timber to a beach and would settle wherever that timber ended up. And I think the sagas are a bit like this. They're these stories that are thrown overboard and followed to the places where they land.
These will be very largely lives about real men and women. They're incredibly rich, and much of that hangs on the issue of honour, what honour is for a Viking.
Yeah. Honour is not something that's shared or based on goodwill or kindness. It's a personal marker of your worth that you have to claim for yourself. And as often as not, that means claiming it from somebody else. If I want honour, I have to take it. And when you fight with your neighbour, you're in a fight for honour. And there's only a limited amount going around, and so you need some of their honour.
So it's like money, in other words.
Like money, yeah. Like a finite pool, and there's only ever so much to go around, and everyone's watching what everyone else has got.
We've been using the term Viking very freely here. I think we better explain what we mean by that term, Kári. Is it actually a Norse word?
Yeah, it comes from Vik, which means a bay. And so a Vikingar, or Vikingur, is just someone who comes literally from a bay. And of course that's where these people came from. They came from the bays and the valleys and the woods of Scandinavia.
But it's kind of also a job description too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something you do rather than someone you are. If you go in summer to England and raid somewhere like this, you have gone Viking. You've engaged in Viking behaviour. And, when you go back and you tell people about what you've been doing, you stop being a Viking in a way. You go back to being a farmer or a father or someone who's trying to build a life and build prosperity. And so it's a really weird mix, right, between this very violent activity that occurs away from home and then your life back there.
You're half Icelandic, born in Iceland, and you are in fact a direct descendant of the greatest of the saga authors, Snorri Sturluson. You are his direct descendant. Do you think of yourself as having meaningful Viking heritage?
I do think that we are somewhat composed of the people that came before us. And I know a lot of people in Iceland are descended from Snorri Sturluson.
It's not just you then?
No, I'm afraid not. I think about a third of the Icelandic population. There's a kind of a genealogical bottleneck in the Middle Ages. And
I have seen proof of this, though. We're not making this up. It's not family folklore. I have seen this in the Icelandic book, the line of descent between you and Snorri.
And that matters to me. I mean, it matters to me that Iceland has this history. And it matters to me that the people who arrived in Iceland in the 800s and after that are known to us. I mean, isn't that wonderful that we know these people?
It's a gift.
Yeah.
So as we leave Lindisfarne, stay with us now and dive straight into the first episode of Viking Lives. We're starting with the life not of a man or a woman, but a god. A god who made a sacrifice of himself to himself, and who fears his death on the day of Ragnarok, the one-eyed lord of the Aesir, Odin.